All right, here we go. So thank you for coming today, Training Your Mind to Thrive. Woohoo! We are going to do a quick spin through a lot of material. So I will, a warning just at the outset that if you actually think that you're going to be able to train your mind to thrive in an hour, then I am out of a job. Because then if it was that easy, we'd all be doing it. But I will talk a lot about the ingredients that go into this and what I've learned. But first, just a little bit about me. Lots of you I know, and I'm so pleased and happy to see the people I know as well as the people I don't. So I'm just going to check, see how my box is going. Okay. I come from a background of sport psychology. So I've worked my career for big box sport organizations, 14 years with the US Olympic Committee, hence my funky accent for those of you who are from Australia and wondering why someone from not around here is talking. But then was recruited over to work at the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, to lead their sports psychology team. And I got to do that for 7 glorious years before the AIS in their wisdom decided that they didn't want to be in the business of sports science so much anymore. So left there in 2018, and now I run my own business. So this is, and hence where I'm coming from. And while it's been a real transition for me to go from someone who represents other people's brands to representing my own, honestly, like the title that you see under my name, I believe is why I'm here on this earth. I just have really come to believe that we don't instinctively know how to thrive. For some of us come by it naturally, just like some athletes are just natural born athletes, but we were not issued an instruction manual for our minds, unfortunately, at birth. And I find there's just so much of our time is often spent fighting against what our minds actually want us to be doing, or the way they're working, and we get into battles and we allow our minds to get in the way too often. And so when we're thinking about thriving, this idea of training our minds to thrive, I believe is a thing and that we can do it. So that's where we are today. And I came upon a lot of what I've been thinking about was reinforced by an event some of you may have been aware of back in June called Thriving in Uncertainty, where I was able to and had the awesome good fortune of getting to talk with 20 other performance psychologists from around the world about their thoughts around how do we help people thrive in uncertainty. And, you know, it's one thing that you think you have an idea, but when you hear it kind of over and over again, reinforced by others, it's a beautiful thing. Sorry, I'm just checking. I've got a couple more people in the waiting room. Let's get them in. So hence my excitement with today and how grateful I am that you're all here with me. So I will say that I talk a lot about performance because that's what people care about, I find, in the worlds that I run in, but I will say things like thriving. I will say things like happiness, because sometimes in sport, sometimes in high pressure occupations where performance is important, I think sometimes we forget the balance of high performance, but also happiness and sustainability. And I have literally worked for coaches in my career who said things like, I break them, you fix them. This idea that somehow to get good at what you're doing means you got to be hard at it. Not to say that hard at times isn't a good idea, but doing it in a smart way. And I have had to pick people up after breaking in that space. And I just think we can be high performers without breaking ourselves. And that's what thriving is about in my mind. So let's get to it. If I can figure out how to move to the next slide, that would be an amazing thing. So I encourage you, if you can, unmute yourself and tell me, or write in the chat box if I can get back to the chat box. Let's see if I can. I might not be able to do that, could I? Without, and see. Oh, wait, can I? Participants. Oh, we got some more in the. All right, so I just let a few more people in, but maybe I can't do this and see the chat box. So I encourage, like, let's think about what is it, why we're here, what we want to learn. Oh, there we go. No, okay, I So feel free to write in the chat box because I can now see it. If there's anything that you want to say. Why are you here? What do you want to learn? And I just, you know, and it might be, oh, I want to learn how you look in makeup, Kirsten. Broadening my perspective. All right. So I think that's, sometimes we live and we're sort of limited and not recognizing that we're limited. Yeah. So awesome to listen, learn, develop my skills in such uncertain times. General interest. To learn and be inspired by my peers to get different angles on our work. So there's a fair few sport and performance psychologists in the room. Exercises to thrive. We'll have a few things, more insights than actual exercises, but I hope to give a few things that you can take away to help myself and my people. Beautiful thing. Always enjoyed our conversations in sport and life. Well, hopefully this will be another enjoyable conversation. Continue to sharpen my skills and be of help. Loved your last program, which put on, keen to hear more from, oh, Sasha, you're such a love. To listen in around the ideas of thriving compared to focusing on problems. Isn't that the truth? Steve, my wonderful co-leader, I'm curious why I saw the promotional material, wonder what's going on there. What have you found to be most effective to thrive under pressure? Unique circumstances such as these need to grow amidst the adversity. Train my mind, continued learning and hearing from experts in the field. Learn your perspective on thriving. I always like hearing somebody else's viewpoint other than my own. Learn from our perspectives, love hearing what works for others and adding to my toolkit. So lots of reasons why we are here, and we will be addressing a fair few, but again, in an hour, it's gonna be a real fast ride. So I'm gonna turn that off so I can, got a few more folks coming in. All right. Thank you for indulging me in this space. I'll just turn that off. So why we are here. So I guess when I think about navigating and thriving in uncertainty, times are getting more uncertain no matter at the best of times, but I know even in the event we did last month, we talked a lot about this, the uber uncertain times that we have now with pandemic and not knowing what's happening. And what I observed, and one of the motivations to be really unpacking this idea of thriving, is that I see so many people struggling to thrive because of the added uncertainty of our times. And so, in listening to the discussion last month, what the vision that came to me is that we're all collectively and also individually kind of, say we're on a mountain ridge hiking, but it's a fog bank of immense proportion is in front of us. And what I see us doing, not on purpose, just because we don't know any better, is we're so desperate to see through the fog, and we put all our efforts in trying to see into the future and railing against the fact that we just can't see through this impenetrable thing that's ahead of us, which the metaphor might be a little overdone, but this idea of our, we look at our financial futures, in Australia here, we're about to enter into the biggest deficit since World War II. Forget the US, don't forget the US, please. Please keep the US in your thoughts, everyone, as they go through like the dip of hell through this pandemic and what this is gonna mean. And so we're on this mountaintop and we're looking at this fog bank. So what we want to do, and we're evolutionarily trained to do, is try to get certainty, and yet there is none. So this is where the fight is. But if you think about what you do, if you're standing on a ridge and you're walking along a ridge and you need to keep moving forward, because that's what life is. We can't stand still. We're moving forward whether we like it or not. Days pass, goes from week to the weekend. We might not be able to see 100 miles ahead, 20 miles ahead, 50 feet ahead, but we can take a step. And with that step, the fog right in front of us opens up a little bit. And so while if we stand still, the fog doesn't change unless the weather changes. And let's, in keeping with this metaphor, let's assume the fog's always going to be here. But if we take a step and we see the next little bit, we can react well to that next little bit. So it might reveal that there's a bit of uneven ground, so I'm gonna have to be careful walking around this little unstable part of my walk, but I'm gonna get through that, and then the next thing comes along. So when I think about the optimal mindset for getting through these times, It's really stepping away from looking and peering and railing against wanting to know about things that we can't control, and staying closer to what we can and being comfortable with that. So I heard lots of performance psychologists talking about this idea of accepting what is. What does that mean? Sorry, I'm going to let some folks into the, look at me toggling between participants coming in and me talking. I'm such a, anyway, so self-congratulation, a big part of thriving in uncertainty, let me just say. So let's keep going here. So where I see this model, where my thinking has come to, is the idea that the basis for how we thrive is really about our health. And I talk a lot in my work, and as I imagine many of us in the sports sciences, about if we're not taking care of ourselves first and foremost in all the basics we know, thriving is less likely. And so that's why I have health at the bottom, but I'm going to be focusing in that middle category around the mindset around thriving. Awareness, adaptability, happiness as sort of the key to get to where, what do I need to do to perform? So perform is another thing that we're not going to talk about today, but do I have the skills to perform, and am I prepared? And certainly sport and exercise psychologists work in that space to help people get ready for performing. But I think it's the middle, it's the meat of the sandwich that we're at today. But before I get there, I'm really wanting to hammer a little bit on everybody around this idea of the basis for our health, and this idea that and I'm sure sports psychologists in the group would agree with me, that if we see athletes, see anybody who's not getting enough sleep, forget sports psychology. It's, we cannot deal with the mind until the body's right. And sleep, we're finding out, is really the basis for wellness in so many areas. So if we're thinking about thriving, it's sleeping, it's paying attention to what we eat and being mindful in our food choices. Sorry, this is starting to sound like the lecture from your mother, right? We talk about physical fitness. How do we keep our bodies in tune? But at the same time, what we do know about brain health is that we were meant to move between 5 and 12 miles a day, which is different from physical fitness. I'm not talking about cardiovascular fitness or strength, but am I getting up and moving? And this is such an affliction in our time of working from home when we sit in front of a desk all day. Are we getting up and moving? The idea of social connection, I think, has been hammered through this pandemic, this idea of how hard it's been to be socially isolated, but at the same time, we need to find ways to do that. All those things contribute to good mental health and the mind. And so when I think about thriving, I kid you not, we go back to the previous slide, we're not going to thrive without the self-care being taken care of. And I find there's an epidemic of us thinking we don't have to do that, or we need to take care of everybody else before us. So I talk a lot more about that, but I think hopefully the message has been conveyed. If anybody has any questions or comments about what I'm saying, you're going to please unmute yourself in the event that I don't check enough to see chat. Well, I'm going to just check the chat box. Oh, so, okay, I'll keep going, pressing on. So my thinking in this space around keys to thriving is, it really comes back down to awareness. And awareness is such an interesting concept that we'll get into. Specifically for me, if you look at the top of the model, we have to know ourselves, aware ourselves. And this is a lot more elusive than we might think. So self-awareness is that ability to pinpoint on the map of the journey you're on where you're starting from. So if I'm not aware of what's going on for me in any given moment, it's going to be hard as hell to know what I'm supposed to do to help myself. So moving kind of in a clockwise fashion, and this is going to be the way we're going to talk today, an awareness of our place in time, both physically but also mentally. And this idea of, I've highlighted the word present because for reasons that will become apparent, but that's going to be a super place we're going to want to spend a lot of time in. And if you think about the metaphor we were using, we're walking on that mountaintop. I'm considering that it's the present moment that I'm paying attention to. It's where my next couple of footprints are. Those are the things I control. So present is really important, but we do want to have an appreciation of how the future and the past impact our ability to be in the present. We're going to touch on the role of thoughts with regard to awareness and our awareness of thoughts, and some insights into the ways in which we do or do not work well with our thinking, as well as with our emotional life. And I have a lot more, some of you would be very aware of my passion around our emotional life and our relationship, each of us, to our emotions. We're going to touch on that as well before we finish today. When I look at this model, I reflect on some of the things that are coming out of the mindfulness literature, and the idea that this body of work is really the next health revolution in the world for us, in the sense that we've gone through a series of health revolutions in the last 50, 60 years. If you go back 50 years and you think about telling somebody you were going to go running, people would say, who's chasing you? It never occurred to us that running was a thing that we did for exercise. And now, of course, we all, we see people doing that. And we appreciate it, even if we may make choices that don't bring exercise into our life. We are aware, most of us, that having that fitness aspect is important. But that's only because we went through a revolution where we learned about how that worked. And now we see all sorts of ways in which fitness is a thing. Another health revolution would have been the stop smoking revolution. Even I grew up in a cloud of cigarette smoke. My mother, don't get me started about how she would sit with her obstetrician and they would trade cigarettes while they were in appointments as I was in utero. So who knows the Nobel Prize winner I could have been had my brain not been shrunk by lots of cigarette smoke. But more recently, we really are more aware of the fast food movement and the processing of food and reading food labels. But I'd argue we still sit, and we see it in sport. I see it in performance, where the mind, everybody knows the mind is important. We all know that it's the difference between, gold and silver on the podium. It's what's between your ears. But this idea of actually working in this space, of understanding what thriving means and training our minds to allow us to be happier, able to thrive, much less perform, I think we're right on the cusp of something big, and I'm very excited to be part of that. Okay, I'm just gonna we got a few more in the waiting room. Sorry about this for folks. Okay. Thanks for everyone who just arrived. Hopefully you can see my screen. Just for anyone who's just arrived in the last 5 minutes, please mute yourselves. But if you have questions in the event I don't get to the chat screen, unmute yourself and interrupt me. All right, so the way I'm looking at this is our understanding of ourselves relative to our minds. And I see this spectrum of people in my work. And I just wonder, as you read this, where if you think about yourself and how you relate to your own mind, or loved ones or people, perhaps if you're a sports psychologist or psychologist and you're working with others, where people sit on this, because I think it's my job to help us move in this space, not just as a psychologist looking at people who might be struggling, but really this spectrum across from kind of poor to great mental health, and how do we get to thriving. So in saying that, hold on, let me, hopefully, yeah. So somebody who's in denial, you hear things like, nothing wrong here, nothing to see, not my problem. So what if I kick the dog? He deserved it. So maybe this is a person who isn't even aware that some of their actions aren't in their best interest, doesn't even know yet that they're actually suffering. This is kind of the way it is. Folks who are in that avoidant place, kind of, there's something behind the curtain here. There's something that I can feel that it's not right. So when it becomes too intense, I might leave the situation. I might pretend it doesn't exist. I might self-medicate. And we certainly have lots of stories around how people might take care of themselves in ways that are not so helpful, but allow them to live in this avoidance space. Or maybe I act out. I'm at the mercy of what's happening to me, and I'm not able to control it. So a sense of avoidance is just kind of blurting out and then going back into avoidance. So we move then to the people in our worlds who understand. So I know there's something not right. I'm not feeling it. I'm suffering a little bit. I'm stuck in some way, but I don't really have an awareness. The fog is kind of all around me, and I don't have a sense of how that's working yet. But I am certainly, I'm starting to have my awareness. So maybe now I'm in a space where I can see that, yeah, I'm not doing things all that well, but at least I'm not fighting myself so much. And I work within my own limitations. But again, because we've not been issued that instruction manual to our mind, it can be that I just don't know what to do. It's okay though, at least. I'm not beating myself up so much because I am able to see foibles for what they are. But finally, this is where my job, and I see lots of sports psychologists, performance psychologists in this space, and just great people in the world. So you don't have to be a psychologist to, help people kind of have some insight in this space, but I'm ready to lean in. And what a concept, because sometimes, when we're in avoidance, it's just unpleasant. And so by not leaning in, we accept that unpleasantness and we never test it out as to what that actually means. Leaning in, being ready to do some work. It's not easy, but this is where I see getting people to, and where my expertise comes in, because then we're ready to, let's do some things. Let's engage in that understanding of the mind. Let's work with it. And I'll have more to say about this, because if everything was so easy, I wouldn't be having this conversation and you wouldn't be listening, because you would know, oh, all this is easy. We've solved it. We're all thriving. So why is this hard? And I want to put it out there. It is hard. People don't change. People continue to suffer. And one of the things that I talk to lots of people about, particularly in times of uncertainty like we're in now, is that we come by our worry and anxiety and concerns about uncertainty very honestly, in the sense that we have evolved to be threat detecting machines. And this goes back, and many of you will have heard analogies like this or there's just the story of, you see two cavemen thousands of years ago exploring the veld, or looking out over the waving grass, and one is a pessimist, one is an optimist. And the pessimist, every time he sees the grass waving, runs away because he thinks it's a saber-toothed tiger. The optimist caveman is like, oh, you silly man, look at you. It was just the breeze blowing. You're missing a beautiful day. Why are you being so hypervigilant? 9 times out of 10, the optimist is right. 10 times out of 10, it's a saber-toothed tiger. And which caveman gets eaten? It's the optimist, unfortunately, because the pessimist has already run away. Pessimist survives to pass his genes down the gene pool, so survives to have children who then go on. And suddenly, 21st century world, we are expert threat detecting machines. Unfortunately, however, the threats in our current environment don't tend to be in the shape of saber-toothed tigers or immediate threats. They're more existential threats, which means that we have not evolved really to manage the world we're in right now in the best way possible, unless we work on it, unless we become aware of how our minds are working, and that the fact is the part of our mind that puts us into the hypervigilant, perhaps the over worry, is a part of our mind that evolved earlier, part of our brain, to be honest. In the sense of, if you make your hand into a fist, it's the middle of the fist where all this stuff comes from. But we have a prefrontal cortex, a way of thinking about our thinking about our emotions, that we can train to help offset the way our minds have evolved. So the biggest thing I share with people in this space is that it is normal to worry. It is normal to feel anxious. This is what we do. However, we have a choice. We can learn to be different in this space, and we can learn to thrive. But it's hard because our minds don't actually go in that space immediately. Okay, any questions along the way? How we doing? Okay. You can unmute yourself, people. This is your chance. The psychologist is letting somebody else talk. I know it's an amazing thing. Doesn't happen very often. I am professionally equipped to speak for many, many, many times. Let's see what we got here. Oh, awesome so far. Oh, I feel really good about myself. Thank you. That was the chat box. All right, so let's keep going. So I want to talk a little bit about self-awareness as sort of the first piece of the puzzle here when we get into learning how to thrive. So I love this quote. This comes from Tasha Eurich, who has written a great book called Insight. She's done a lot of work on self-awareness, and I wonder if this resonates for anyone in the room here. Just like we all think we're above average drivers, which can't be the case. Some of us have to be crap drivers because that's the way averages work. 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only a few of us actually are. And I say us because, of course, I'm one of the 10 to 15, and I'm sure every one of you is quietly thinking, I'm one of the self-aware ones. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. But I think that the stat is interesting and something we want to be thinking about. And why is that? Well, first of all, according to the research, we do operate with blind spots. So our mind has many ways of sort of shortcutting to heuristics around how we operate. So we don't know that we have blind spots. This idea, we like to feel good about ourselves. And who doesn't like to feel good? So we like to see a rosier picture of ourselves. Just like when somebody told me I was doing awesome so far, I am so awesome right now. So thank you very much for whoever wrote that. And finally, I think we are being aided and abetted by social media to really get into a narcissistic place around our need to see ourselves positively is being fed in an unfortunate way by social media. So we come by it honestly, but nevertheless, it's a skill we need to develop. So some ideas around this. First of all, self-awareness is both our internal sense of who we are, and that's kind of where I'm coming from this. How do I understand myself? Just letting somebody in, sorry. And is it a true understanding of myself? And then this external, which leads to the external self-awareness, is my understanding of myself mirrored by the people around me? And that we are aware when we think we're different, and like you get that piece of really icky feedback from somebody who lets you know that actually, no, that didn't go over the way you thought it did, or this is the way people are seeing you, and we need to be able to look at that. So just one slide worth of ways in which we can start to look at our self-awareness. I think it's a really interesting thing. Often what we can find out about ourselves is in the form of what bothers us about others. So the things that nag us about how others are in our worlds may say something about our own selves. That, I don't like the things I see in others that might be part of me. And it's just worth a reflection as I pay attention to patterns in my life interpersonally. I have a lot to say about contemplative practices that go well beyond the scope of the time we have, but this idea of spending time with our minds allows us to build our self-awareness. How can we not? And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's well beyond the scope of an hour to get into this. But things like meditation and mindfulness practices help us start to understand what's happening between our ears. So we want to be able to identify our own emotional foibles. What's happening? What are the things? What are the emotions that might hijack us and make us less than the person we want to be? And then our internal self-awareness is also informed by our values. Externally, I think it's the old chestnut about asking and actually receiving feedback. Not only from people who love you very much, but maybe from the person who challenges you to be your very best. Who am I seeking out in my life? And am I making an honest attempt to regularly check in from others about how I am in the world? And then I think this is also about taking risks. How do I get into the world so that more people see me? So if I'm one who I don't really get a good sense of who I am because maybe I'm afraid to be out there, I've got to take some risk and put myself out there. And believe you me, doing something like this, a webinar, and inviting people in, I'm really eager to get your feedback, but this was a huge stretch for me to do this. So I'm trying to live the dream in terms of making myself uncomfortable to help my self-awareness. So I'm not trying to ask you to do anything I'm not doing myself. Let's put it that way. All right, so then going into this idea of an awareness of time is a really important aspect of how we learn to thrive, this idea of really becoming aware of this. So I know, I mean, this is not something we all don't know, but this idea that we do spend time in the past, and some of it is really useful with regard to, say, it's going down memory lane and having a wonderful time. Every year on my anniversary, my husband and I get out the old wedding scrapbook and we have a lovely time laughing at the old pictures. Beautiful thing. But we also sometimes really hurt ourselves by getting into the past, ruminating about past mistakes. We can't get out of it. So sometimes the past doesn't serve us as well as we would like it to. Relative to the future is a whole place where our hypervigilant, evolutionarily trained brain wants to go and look at what's happening, what might be happening, what if this happens, what if that happens. And unfortunately, while some of it is important, we need to go into the future to be able to plan. I don't find many people going into the future and thinking, what's the best case scenario for whatever this thing is that I'm concerned about? We often get into worst case scenario thinking, which also increases our suffering. So this idea that we time travel all the time, and we want to be aware of when we do it and how is it serving us. If I were, you know, we talk about being in the present. It's such a catchphrase, but nevertheless, I really want to be aware of the reality that the present moment is important for any number of reasons. One of which, literally, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, it's the only moment we actually get to control. And so from an athlete perspective, you're in a game situation, you got to have your attention right in front of me. And any sports psychologist listening now is well aware of the athlete who starts thinking about, oh, I'm going to win. I have a chance of winning. I've taken my attention out of the present. Suddenly I'm thinking about getting up in the medal stand and I don't do what's right in front of me and actually take away the future that was right there for me. So we want to be able to develop ways in our daily lives and practices that allow us to be here more often. And not indiscriminately, but more often. But I use this a lot, and I talk to my clients about this idea that not only is it important from a cognitive sense, but it's actually important from an emotional sense. This is an awesome study done by a couple of social psychologists out of Harvard. And this idea that they had people wear little devices that pinged them. They had thousands of people and pinged them. And at any point in time, the people had to document, what was I thinking? What was I feeling? What was I doing? And at the end, they collected all this data, and you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen, the different things that people were doing and the emotional impact of those. But the long and the short of this is that for the most part, when our minds wandered, we were less happy than we were. If you go right to the bottom of this, this screen, you see not mind wandering, pretty happy. And this idea that often when we wander, we are less happy than when we are in the present and focused on what we're doing right in front of us. And so when I'm looking to lever or motivate people to start getting practices in this space, we literally thrive more when we are aware of and attending to what's in the present more often. So yeah, sure. All right, I'm just going to stay in the present moment more often. Isn't that a great thing? You know, so we have lots of chestnuts around this, and it sounds simple. It's certainly not easy, and for lots of us, it's downright unpleasant to contemplate trying to do this without having something to focus on. Like if I am just going to try to stay with my mind in a moment, and for anybody who's tried to teach meditation or has tried meditation and is not stuck with it, the mantra is, my mind is too crazy. I can't stay with it. I can't be here with it. I am uniquely incapable of learning how to do this. And I like to liken this to going to the gym, to training. Like the first time we went to the gym, any of us, or the first time we tried to run, was it a pleasant experience? Was I on that, flow experience of just being one with the activity? Probably not, because we weren't very good at it. But it doesn't occur to us in the physical realm To go to the gym once and say, well, that didn't work out, I must be uniquely incapable of training my body physically, therefore I won't do it anymore. And yet this is the approach we take with the mind. And I'm here to say that when we do practices like meditation, it is not in the interest of becoming the best meditator on the planet. Of course, you can have that goal if that floats your boat. But really, when I engage in mind practices that help me to thrive, it is in the interest of thriving, not being the best practicer on the planet any more than you go to the gym to be the best bench presser on the planet. We don't, we see it as a means to an end. So let me, sorry, I'm just letting somebody else in. All right, so we have about 20 minutes and I just want to make the point that this aspect, going back for a moment, sorry. Where's my cursor? Developing ways to understand what's happening in the moment, both in our minds and in our environments, is a key aspect to thriving. So it's about being able to focus on what's happening right in front of me. It's also about being able to live with what's happening between my ears. And the key to this is not simply the focus. So it's one thing to say, yep, I'm learning how to do that, but it's with an attitude of, Buddhists would call it equanimity. We talk about kind of a spacious awareness, thinking about this in light of the serenity prayer. So for anybody, and this, I'm not using this from a religious standpoint, but if you would go through the tenets of the serenity prayer, may God grant me the serenity to accept that which I can't change, the serenity. So that's the attitude we're bringing to this practice, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. If I were to kind of sum up in a really pithy way, what we're after here is those are the ways in which we're doing this. And serenity is the attitude. It is saying sometimes it's like this. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know what our travel future is. I have an 89-year-old dad. I don't know if I'll see him again because he lives in the US. But nevertheless, that's how it is. So I want to figure out a way to cope with this reality in the best way possible. And I find another thing that holds people back from wanting to train this aspect of mind thriving is that equanimity seems in our society to suggest passivity. That, oh, I just accept everything. I just roll over and take it. And I would argue that no, it is the ability to accept what's on offer, but in a way that lowers our reactivity to the point where we can see it more accurately. So we can see our present moment as accurately as it is meant to be seen. We understand through self-awareness ourselves as, sorry, I'm just let somebody else in and it's making me move my slides. We see ourselves accurately. We see past, present, future accurately, and we see our environment accurately with this spacious awareness, with this equanimity, so that when we choose to take action, it is smart action, right action. But without that ability to step back and be equanimous, have that spacious awareness, we are often then being yanked around by a mind that has not been trained, that is not wanting to help us thrive. I'm just looking at the chat box. Bear with me, folks. Yeah, so I love it because Gustavo Cortes says in the beginning, it's a challenge, this idea of being one with our minds, but let it flow and enjoy the moment. Isn't that a lovely thing? And Joseph Goldstein, a very prominent meditation teacher, says about the present moment and our inability or our unwillingness or the unpleasantness we feel when we sit and just be, that being bored with the present moment simply means we're not paying attention enough. And I love that idea that we are constantly searching for the next thing and then sitting and being present and allowing ourselves to be here, and we get bored. And there is so much to learn in the present moment that when we don't pay much attention. So when we talk about that present moment focus being simple but not easy, yeah, it's a simple concept. But the ability to sit and really enjoy the moment in that sense of really feeling it more and more deeply is at the center of this, and what, you know, what a big piece of what thriving's about. So I can be chaos around me, but this present moment, this is damn good. And I'll say something about the concept of enough in this concept. Sorry, I said that twice. So if you look out into nature and you see a tree, you think, there's a tree. And let's step away from nature for a moment and think about ourselves. And I think, here I am. Am I enough? And it's how I'm feeling enough. And is it enough? Is my life enough? And often our ability to see ourselves in our lives in this concept of enoughness is very conditional. So we might think, I'm not enough. I'm not happy enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not gifted enough. I'm an imposter. I'll have enough when I get X or Y or Z. But stepping out of that paradigm for a moment, and let's just, when we're thinking about the simplicity of being here and what this means, and the ability to accept. One aspect of acceptance is this idea of accepting enoughness. Am I enough right now? Can I possibly entertain this idea that I'm enough? Because if we go out back to nature and we look at that tree again, does it ever cross our minds to think that tree's not enough? Nah, that tree needs to have like 77% more leaves before it's going to be okay. And yet, so this idea of the unconditional acceptance of what is, getting into that space more often. It's not to say that we don't strive to be better, but sometimes we want to be able to say in our lives, I am enough. And when I think about thriving, it's allowing that space, that spacious awareness, and that emotional experience of enoughness can be very helpful. Francis Hamel mentions the space between stimulus and response. And so if anybody is familiar with Viktor Frankl's work, In Search of Meaning, he was a Holocaust survivor. He did some wonderful work around this idea that our minds, we do have space between the stimulus, whatever's hitting us from our environments or even from our own minds, and a space before we decide how we're going to respond. And that's what I'm talking about, that often because we don't give ourselves the space, we respond without thinking or we're hijacked. How do we sort of cultivate that space? So I would agree with Max Pollack. He asks, how in the chaotic moments and situations, how does this concept play out in those moments? In my mind, it's remaining in the eye of the storm. And this is not something you can just, often, I don't find athletes or humans without any sort of awareness and training in this space can I, in the most chaotic moments, achieve this state. But yes, that's this idea that I have an ability to be aware and serene even in chaos, but it is a skill to learn and well beyond our hour to try to drill down on. So let's see, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to touch on some awarenesses that I think are very helpful around thoughts and emotions, but we're going to go through this. And for psychologists in the group, apologies, because this is like Evelyn Wood speed reading through major sections of psychological, the landscape of psychology. But I think some really important insights about thinking that really tie into this idea of thriving. Our thoughts, we do not control our thoughts. And I cannot count how many clients, how many people, be it in my coaching world or in my world as a psychologist, have said to me, please help me stop thinking this thought. And we really want to rewrite the question. It's not about, can I stop thinking, but it is going to be about developing, how do I develop a different relationship with the thought and stop fighting it? It's going to come. And how do we do that better? So anybody who's familiar with the therapeutic approach of acceptance commitment therapy would be aware of that psychologists are helping people work in this space. But I do, it's something that we can all consider, is that as we observe our thoughts, and we like some thoughts, they're really fun, some thoughts not so much, but we want to be less judgmental and more accepting that all thoughts are welcome. I love this idea that, have we ever been in our own heads and just gotten so tired of our repeated narratives? 90% of our thoughts just run over and over again. The old chestnuts that just keep going, narratives the stories we tell ourselves. And so we wanted to, interesting. So what we understand now about the brain, however, is that we can shift our narratives. We don't have to play the same ones over and over again. But nevertheless, how many times do we do that in our own lives? We find ourselves running down the same train tracks over and over again. While our thoughts are real, we've just thought them, they're often, so often inaccurate. And yet, if we don't have the insight and the self-awareness to even be able to consider, what does the evidence actually suggest? I thought somebody must hate my guts, or they're thinking about this, or every fan in Australia is waiting for me to win gold medal. I have to carry everybody's hopes to the finish line, and I'm going to buckle under that pressure. It might be a thought, but is it accurate? And so we certainly, psychologists around the world do lots of thought checking, evidence checking with clients, but I think we can also do this ourselves. It's just to step back, especially the thoughts that are causing suffering. Let's just take a moment and think about, do we need to be hijacked in that way? I love this. Our thoughts are real, but not necessarily true. And maybe it's the same thing as accurate, but I think it's important to recognize that just because our brain constructed something, our mind made up something, we have a choice. And that's that whole space between stimulus and response. One of this is the evaluation of our thinking. And finally, last but not least, we are not our thoughts. We are more than our thoughts. But often we get caught up in thinking everything that is in my head, that's who I am. We are much more than that. All right, how about that? Thinking in what, 2 minutes? Nice job, Kirsten. Woo! So if I were to ask anybody to unmute themselves and give an opinion about what are emotions, how do you define emotions? What would we say? And I'm not asking for an evaluation of emotions, but if I had to say emotions are, anybody care to, let's see if I can get feel free to put it in the chat box. Okay, the physiology, interesting. So Mike Vincent says, I define emotions as the physiology of belief. So there's a physiological aspect to emotions, absolutely. A response to a stimulus. So it can often feel like emotions come out of nowhere, but generally there's an interaction between thinking and emotions. Feelings. So another word for emotions might be feelings, but what I would say, also interesting, Sasha says, emotions convey to me the truth of my perspective on what I believe about something. So maybe I have a belief in how I feel, the emotional respect, may confirm or contrast with that. A human trait, who knows? I don't know if animals, you could argue that maybe other animals feel this as well. But what I would say is emotions are at the heart a physiological sensation that we label. And some of them are pleasant, some of them are unpleasant, some are neutral. But so you can take my idea and run with it, or you can argue with that. But I love to kind of really get it down to this level that it's a sensation and we can identify where in our bodies we're feeling it. We put labels on it. Not only do we put labels on it, happiness, lust, satisfaction, terror, anger. Somebody unmuted themselves, and I'm happy if you want to.
Yes. Can I say something, Kirsten?
Who's this?
Gustavo.
Hi, Gustavo.
How are you? Well, I would say emotions are multi-component. There are various sensations happening at the same time. I would say it's a short time feeling, short time duration.
Yes, thank you.
Sometimes it can last, let's say, a minute, 1 minute, or maybe a few days. It's like happiness, fear, anger, tension, sadness, fury. I would say that usually emotions are related to a reaction to a situation. That's how I would say what is emotion.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. And I'm going to riff off some of what you said, but I love We absolutely need emotions to survive. Some of the basic emotions like fear and anger were right out of the fight, flight, freeze kind of part of our nervous system. So we absolutely, they serve an evolutionary purpose. But just riffing off, and again, really quick review, they are like the weather when they act in a mentally healthy way, let's put it this way. So when we get stuck in emotion is often when we might be concerned about whether or not we are having some mental health issues. If an emotion sticks around, say if I'm sad for more than 2 weeks, psychologists would start to look at that as possible symptom of depression. There's lots of other characteristics, but this idea that our emotional experience is not meant to last forever. So they are transient. Some we like and some we don't, and therein can lie a problem, because we will go after some and then we get an aversive relationship with others, and our reactivity is often a thing that undermines our ability to thrive. So I really try to normalize this and try to normalize that all emotions are welcome to the party that is our mind and our body. Emotions aid and abet in our ability to time travel away from the present. So we think about anger tends to be that emotion that time travels us to the past. We don't tend to get angry about stuff in the future. It's kind of funny that way. I don't get angry about stuff that hasn't happened yet, but I do get, as soon as it happens and I have a reaction to it, there's anger. Whereas worry, fear tend to be forward-facing emotions. We don't tend to fear things that have already happened unless they re-trigger us into something else into the future. But I find an interesting time travel aspect that's good to become aware of in our emotional lives. We don't have to identify with our emotions. And so a lot of the work is around where is that sensation felt, and in a semantic in our, we tend to say things like I am angry, as opposed to anger is being felt in the body and what's that about, so that we can get some distance, but we don't have to identify with our emotions. All right, so that kind of covers where I wanted to head. I do want to say I appreciate that this is a speed read through a lot of stuff, and I just want to offer up at the end some things. I'm happy to take a deeper dive for anyone on this call who's interested in learning more or knows people who would be interested in learning more. And here's kind of the end all pitch, and you can leave, but I just want to be able to say, if you are someone you know might be interested in learning more, we have the event package from the Thriving in Uncertainty weekend. So we had 20 interviews with a number of experts in the field of performance psychology, 20 hours of content that is available on my website for the low price of $150. And it provides it's an amazing experience of talking to experts who are turning psychology inside out, not only about thriving in uncertainty, but how they work with people in various aspects of things. I'm offering a masterclass to kind of unpack this for folks who would want to learn more about self-awareness. So I take people through a webinar that really dives down into how do we work on self-awareness? How do we work in this space of mindfulness? What are the ways in which we can train this? And then we have group support in that space. How do I literally learn the habits of smarter thinking? How do I work better with my emotions? And then finally, and this is if you feel like I really need to sit down, I am in that place on that spectrum we talked about where I'm willing to lean in and work on this, and I know I need to have some guidance on how to do that. I offer an individual coaching package. So the prices are listed. I would be delighted to talk to you or anyone that you know if you are interested in learning more about in any of these ways of working. So either the package that's available on my website, you can just go there, talk to me about the masterclass theories or the coaching package. And you can reach me. My name is Kirsten Peterson, mouthful for everyone, but there it is. And I have a website, and you can contact me through the website or at my email address. Whew. I have never finished a webinar on time, but this is as close as I get. So woo for me, yay, yay, yay. This is breaking my habit. I'd love to hear from you via email or in the chat box about how you found this experience of talking about it, how I can make this better. I am definitely wanting to pass the word that I think this is where we need to go, and this is the next health revolution.